gather together virtually, but in the way, as a Victoria College community, we acknowledge this sacred land in which the University of Toronto operates. It has been this site of human activity for over 15,000 years. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Piton First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy, the Confederacy of the Ojibwe, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. But we in Vic are also mindful of broken covenants and the need to strive to make right with all the relations. And as I read this text, I reflect on this personally and recount constantly my sort of appreciation of the beautiful natural landscape that we enjoy here in the city of Toronto, and in the neighboring lands around it, but also reflect a great deal of the urgency of all of our responsibility to care for this land. As we know, and the summer is no exception to what we've known for some time, although it gets more extreme, how troubled the world is in terms of its environment, and how we could benefit from the traditional and profound wisdom of the Indigenous nations to try to find a more sustainable future in partnership with them. Now, with that said, I would just also mention that these slides will be up in terms of the Quercus website, which all of you have access to. This is the Vic 101 Pathway to Undergrad. So there are great resources to look at and understand our relationship to and our responsibilities with respect to truth and reconciliation and our relationship with modern and traditional, Indigenous history. But with that said, let's talk a little bit about learning supports from your perspective. When I talk about learning supports here, and what unites all the professionals with us today are professionals that help you sort of adapt and sort of reflect on the way to be a student most successfully and academically. This involves, to some extent, sometimes special skills that you may already have, but will continue to develop as you go through university life. And they could be skills that are both inside the classroom, but also how you balance your life in the classroom and outside the classroom. These are all skills that you've already developed, and these are skills that you will continue to make work as a university student. The goal here is not to make you feel unprepared. In fact, I believe strongly that every student who comes to U of T has been adapting to their learning their entire lives. You've been meeting and surpassing milestones and changes in your education ever since you were young. And this is just one more of those moments where you're entering into a slightly new phase. But understanding both how the university works and what supports exist gives you an ability to look ahead and be ready to adapt nimbly to any new challenges that come up as you discover them, or to make sure you continue to hone your excellent skills that you already have to make the most out of university. But making the transition can be, nevertheless, quite tricky. So we're going to try a little poll, and I'm going to see if I can make this work. I'm just going to bring something up here and hit present. So if you can see this, I want you to go to menti.com. That's MENTI.com. And there's a code, you should see it at the top of the screen, 7115-1687. And when you get to that, I want you to start to enter in some of the things you think, what you think is the most important skill, academic skill that you should have when learning at the university. And if you want to enter multiple answers, you can do that. But why don't you go to that site right away and see if you can start entering things. And let's see if we can get some things. Time management just came up. Wow. So that's the first one to cross the line. Self-discipline, lovely, lovely. See a few more coming up. I love the graphics. So all the words are jumping around, vying for opportunity here. Logical reasoning, reading, self-discipline, nice. Critical thinking, okay, it's stabilizing at this point. Time management is still kind of winning, which is a really good point and such. Oh, amazing. I'm now just mesmerized by your answering, so thank you for doing all this. I'll give it a few more moments and see if any of the things change. Motivation, lovely, seeing that too. Persistence, initiative, really, really excellent. It's still coming out. I'm just thinking any more that really socializing, nice. That's very, very good. Excellent, excellent point. Bargaining, very interesting word and a very profound word in many ways to this. All right. Thank you. If you haven't put in your word in yet, keep going, but I certainly see a really great sense. And I really find it interesting that some of the ones that are sticking out the most strongly, apart from time management, which is kind of holding the center of this rose, are things like balance, self-discipline, perseverance, and things like this. Now let's see if we can go to the next slide and see if we can go to the next one here. Let's see here. Now, this one is a little more personal, but it might be the same to answer. I don't know. It depends. But what do you think what academic skill do you think will your biggest challenge? What's the one you're most either worried about or thinking you have to work on? Well, there's time management. It crosses the line first. There we go. Leadership, public speaking, very interesting. Focus, procrastination, work-life balance. Thank you all, by the way, for not only answering, but answering candidly. Independence, really, that's really interesting. Stress management, very good. Self-care, stress management, these are vital aspects of things as well. All right, I'm going to exit from this and come back to the slides, but you can keep answering if you want because I'm seeing it on another sort of monitor, so I can report to it and such like this. So I won't try to summarize this stuff. I think that all of us can see in a way the word cloud is summarized as such, but I want this to be sort of something to consider as we talk about this and something even for our panelists to reflect on when they see these responses. Because each of these panelists and our guests are professionals in a very particular area of learning support. But all these factors in some way or shape or form will intersect with the work they do and the way they support students. And it's interesting because some of the questions that I was thinking about when I put on the slide, which you can see, are coming clear. Is there a range here? Absolutely, an extraordinary range that ranges from what you might consider something technical, like how do I do this skill quite specifically and mechanically at successfully the university, to skills that are really about living life in a way that finds its right balance and best effort to be your best as a student, but also living, your life overall as a student. So skills are both about, things like reading or writing skills or critical reasoning, but they're also about time management. They're also about focus. They're also about self-care and things like this. And that seems to be extraordinarily viable. It's also a sign that you've all been reflecting already on what it means to go to university. And none of you are coming into this, with, with a shrug. A lot of these things are on your mind, and that's normal and quite understandable. But it does show some of the things we think about traditionally when we go to university. The reason why time management is up front makes a lot of sense, because one of the things we tell students and students here when they come to university is that they have to make their own time. They have to carve it out with their own discipline in that way. And that's a pretty vital aspect. So you've already absorbed that. I also just want to emphasize, and maybe more for the panelists to talk about as we go forward, is how these terms interconnect. I think things like time management and focus, the two that were most prominent in the last question, have a real strong connection between them, because how we achieve and sustain our sense of attention is about managing time, not just to get everything done, but to also find the time for us to be at our most balanced and our most rested state. So we are learning and applying ourselves in the best way. But with that said, I think we should now get to our panelists. So I'm going to stop sharing for the moment, and I'm going to bring us back in so we can just look at faces and begin that process again. With that in mind, I'm going to start with the obvious thing and ask each of our panelists to quickly just introduce themselves and their job. So to make it easy for them, I will just go through them in the order that I see them on my screen. So let's start with Ben.
Hello again, friends. My name is Benjamin Potrov, and my job with Vic is a learning strategist, which is kind of like a coach for some of the skills that you use across all of your courses, things like time management and motivation and focus. And it was really kind of cool to see the responses to those two questions, because they were certainly reflecting some thoughts that I was having through our session. So my name is Ben, and I am the on-location learning strategist.
Lovely, Ben. Thank you so much. Now, next up on my list is Alexa. Alexa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexa. I'm the on-location accessibility advisor supporting students here at Vic. I support with academic accommodations for students with disabilities.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And next, with a name, first name that seems to be, oddly sort of close, but so that's just mostly to confuse me, not anyone else. Alexia, please let us know about you and what you do.
Hi, everybody. My name's Alexia. Alexia Hannes, and I'm a writing instructor at Vic's Writing Center. And so essentially, I'm here to support all of your writing needs at every stage of the writing process with pleasure.
Thank you so much, Alexia. And now let's go, and certainly not least, Diane.
Hello, my name is Diane Michaud, and I've been an academic librarian going on 13 years and at Victoria for 3 years at the E.J. Pratt Library. And I think I'll get to tell you more about what I can help with in a future question.
You're absolutely right. It's as if we planned some of these questions right even before we started the session. Thank you so much. I'm going to let any panelist answer this in whatever order they want, and we'll get through. But the next question is indeed peeling back the next layer. You've already talked a little about who you are and your job in the broadest sense, but maybe take us in a little bit about what you offer students. That may include kind of how you talk to them and things like that. So anyone want to jump in and peel back more layers about what it means to visit you and what the students get out of it? Oh, Ben, you had your hand up first, and then we'll go to Diane.
I like talking and raising my hand, so that was great. So what does it mean to visit a learning strategist? We have slightly longer appointments, so they last about 45 minutes to an hour. So it is kind of sitting down for a more detailed conversation. When we're talking about learning strategy development, as Tom already alluded, like we're often building on a lot of those skills that you have created and tested and tried throughout a lot of your educational experiences. And sometimes it's a conversation just because that skill set isn't meeting the challenge that's in front of you right now. And what we are trying to accomplish through a learning strategy conversation is what slightly new techniques or approaches may help you to better address the challenge. Typically, a learning strategy appointment has 3 components. The first is really kind of a getting to know you a little bit better. So we try to learn a little bit more about what you think about learning and what learning looks like in your context. We spend a little bit of time in the middle of our conversation just itemizing what are the areas of challenge that you're seeing right now. And then from there, we pivot to a collaborative conversation about strategies. And really what I'm trying to do is to pitch a whole bunch of ideas to see if any of them will help you in that skill development. That conversation works best when students come with their critical minds and try to poke holes in those ideas, because I think that's really what helps us to find out what version of those strategies may work best in your context. So that's a typical learning strategy conversation, 3-part conversation arc. Your takeaway is having kind of a bouquet of new strategies or techniques or processes that you may be able to apply to your ongoing evolution of awesomeness.
Lovely. Evolution of Awesomeness is now going to be the name of my new rock album, and should be appearing in stores, well, streaming services soon. Stores are an old-fashioned way of doing music. Diane, pick it up next. Tell us a bit more about you.
Sure. So a little more focused than some of the things Benjamin was talking about. We are your research specialists on campus, and we're your support team for that. So we do a lot of things that hopefully help you that don't even involve necessarily seeing us face to face. We create online research guides for specific courses. We may make an appearance in one of your courses if we're invited by your instructor to talk about research approaches for the assignments in that specific course. And we like those because we get to get really into the details rather than just talking broadly about research strategies. We are also available to meet one-on-one with students, and those are similarly 45 minutes to an hour. They can be shorter too. And usually what happens then is students will have a bit of a research topic or a broad idea, and the conversation we tease out through a lot of questions, help them fine-tune their topic, pick appropriate search terms, maybe point them in the direction of some collections that they may not know about that aren't rising to the top with the searches they're doing. So basically show you some techniques, but we try to get you to come up with the ideas, and then we kind of tell you the mechanics of it. And a lot of students find that by discussing their research topic with us, they end up fine-tuning it, and you'll leave with a lot of resources because we like to give you a choice of the things that speak to you, the supporting and informative sources that work best for what you want to say about whatever topic you're writing on or presenting on, etc.
Thank you so much. Oh, go for it. Keep going.
So I was just going to say, we also do other work like continuing to develop the collection. which are the books that you can take out, and supporting learning technologies, and just generally fostering critical thinking about information, and being critical about everything out there, because we know there's truth is a word that should be in quotes. Okay, stop there.
No, it's lovely. And actually, you've picked up on something I want to mention. Critical thinking was one of those words that popped up in the cloud quite early. And we associate it with, obviously, the work within courses. But the work that you do is really vital to sort of, apply that process to sort of navigate through and discover the information and what you think about it, and how you want to have it play out in your developing thoughts. I, as an undergraduate student, took several years before I had to take a course that needed research. And it made me even more tense until it finally happened, because I wasn't sure I had the skills. And so it's incredibly beneficial, the work you do. All right, between Alexa and Alexia, who wants to take it up next?
I can go next.
Okay.
Oh, wait, do you want to go? Okay. Okay. So like I said earlier, we support students with disabilities, but I do want to clarify that not every student identifies with that word disability, and that's okay. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about who can register with accessibility services to receive academic accommodations. So maybe first I'll talk a little bit about that, who registers to receive accommodation, and how you can register. And if you are in the in-person event, apologies, because some of this might be repeat, but I still think it's important to share. So we support about 6,000 students at the St. George campus. So when you register with accessibility services, you'll be assigned an advisor to provide some support to you. Since I'm the on-location advisor at Vic, it might be me, but we do have advisors at the central office. We have a mental health team, a health team, neuro team. So just depending on the diagnoses you have, that can also guide the triage process and assign an advisor. So 6,000 students are registered. About 53% of those students have a mental health related diagnosis. So we support students with anxiety, depression, eating disorders, schizophrenia. We also support students who have learning disabilities, so students with dysgraphia. We also support students with ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, mobility and physical disabilities, and chronic health too, so chronic fatigue, anemia. So just keep that in mind. You might not think that you can register. Some students also say that they don't want to take accommodation because they don't think they need it. You're not taking accommodation away from somebody else. So I just want to make that very clear. These accommodations are in place to provide support to you and remove barriers that are in place at the institution and academically. So even if you don't have a diagnosis now, if you're making the transition to year one and you start to notice some symptoms, or even if you just feel like you're having a hard time and things are becoming very overwhelming, please visit Health and Wellness, because they're familiar with our registration forms. They could provide some support to you, see if there's a diagnosis there, and then of course provide a follow-up support with your health. So I just want to say that as well. To register with accessibility services, we do have a form called the Certificate of Disability. You can find it on our website. If you just Google Accessibility Services U of T, the St. George website should pop up. So that form has to be filled out by a healthcare provider, typically someone who can make a diagnosis, who's licensed to do that. So it could be a family doctor, a psychiatrist, psychologist. If you don't have a family doctor, that's okay too, because Health and Wellness can meet with you in the fall and they could fill out those forms for you. So you'd fill out the Certificate of Disability. What we're looking for is not just your diagnosis. We're looking at the functional impacts, how disability-related symptoms are impacting you and what kinds of accommodations we could put in place. And I will note too, for mental health-related diagnoses, you don't have to declare what it is. We just need to see the functional impacts. So that's another important piece. I'll try to, maybe I'll make this a little briefer. Sorry, I realize I'm going on. But we provide support with academic accommodations, so test and exam accommodations and in-course accommodations. I'll give some examples, but keep in mind They are very individualized. So it's different depending on the person and the impacts you're experiencing. And accommodations you may have received in high school might not be the same at university, just because we also have to maintain the core learning objectives of your programs. But some examples are extensions on assignments, volunteer note-taking or peer note-taking, break time during class, break time during exams, additional writing time during exams, and different spaces to write exams and tests. So just some general accommodations that we provide. And yeah, so when you do register, you'll have an intake meeting with an advisor. It would be about an hour, and then follow-up meetings throughout the term to provide some support and check in to see how you're doing. So those meetings could be anywhere from half an hour to an hour.
Amazing. Thank you, Alexa. There's a lot to cover in your portfolio, so I appreciate the detail because there's a all different ranges that could be the support can provide. Now let's go last but certainly not least. Alexia, why don't you tell us a little bit about more about what students get with ACU?
Hi, again, I'm Alexia, and I am one of several writing instructors at Vic's Writing Center. And the first thing I want to say is that the Writing Center is for everyone. So I think if there were a common misconception about the Writing Center that I've encountered throughout the past term and a bit when I've been working at Vic's Writing Center, is that students will come thinking that they need to make use of the center only if they are having immense situations of struggle with their writing, which is sometimes, as we all struggle, writing is challenging on so many levels, but the Writing Center can help you address a very, very wide range of needs. So for example, a student may come to me simply because they have a topic, an essay topic, an assignment that they haven't even started yet, and they just want to have a conversation about their ideas. Because for the most part, I think human beings as students are not autodidacts, which means that we do better when we're in dialogue with someone else. And a good portion of that dialogue is getting excited about and getting connected to the work that you are about to do or that you're in the midst of doing. So students, you know, I just want to send out that message that everybody is welcome to make these appointments, whether you're at the very beginning of an assignment, whether you have a draft, whether you have a final draft, we can help you all along the way. And one of the most satisfying experiences that I've had this year is to see a student multiple times, which often happens throughout all the stages of a piece. So I get to see the beginning right to the end, and that's really fun for me, and just very, very interesting to go through that process. And the other thing is that we really do offer individualized support. So we meet you where you are at with your writing skills. And one of the best things about this role, because I have taught, you know, as an instructor, as a university instructor, one of the things I love about this role is that I get to be there for the student. There's no other interfering, you know, elements. I'm there simply to help you to develop your ideas and to learn and to write at your best. And the other thing that probably I would like to mention, but just before finishing, is that I'm also here to help you, apart from the immediate needs that you may have when you bring a piece, to help you develop as a writer long-term so that you can become that interlocutor for yourself, you know, so that you can go on and have the kinds of dialogues that we have with yourself, so you can develop independence as a writer and confidence as a writer. So that's it for now. I'm sure we'll come back to more questions afterwards. Thank you.
I've learned how to unmute. Thank you so much. And I'm now thinking there should be an extra learning support just for me so I don't keep mispronouncing Alexia's name incorrectly. So by the end of this, I will figure out what's wrong with me. But I want to do a couple of quick lightning rounds because one of the answers you gave, there's a couple of themes that came up, and some of you have sort of answered this, but just to quickly send some shape, and you can answer whatever order. The first lightning round question is, typically, if as much as you could say, how often do you meet the students who come to you and such, and how do you talk about the sort of the multiple things? Because we've just heard about sort of writing journeys, right, and this process of development. So there's real benefit to repeat stuff. But in typical ways, how do you think about the frequency of contact in your jobs as you work with students? Anyone can start, or I'll pick somebody.
I can go.
All right.
I think it really depends on the student. So accessibility advisors, we're here for you as needed. Some students meet with us, they register, they receive their accommodation. We talk about how to use them, and we don't meet again. If students are able to request their accommodation, register for tests and exams, you don't have to check in if things are going well and no concerns are coming up. However, I do like to connect with students at least 2 to 3 times throughout the semester, just to provide a point of contact, ask more about your courses, because there may be other accommodations that we can discuss. Students tend to make meetings with me more frequently if they're experiencing some flare-ups of disability-related symptoms. And so there's really no limit, I guess, or an average number of times I'll meet with a student. It really depends on what's going on for them individually. Sometimes I meet people halfway through the year because they broke an arm and need some accommodation. So it can be very short term for a temporary moment in time, or it can be throughout the whole academic journey. So yeah.
All right, let me just throw to the next person. Alexia, how do most students see you multiple times? How are you finding that process with all the students you see?
So far, I have had a lot of actually multiple visits with students. I know that it's not necessary, and I have had students that have come just for one particular paper, and that was that, we dealt with that, and they're doing well independently of the writing center. But I have met with students 3 times easily, the same student throughout the term. And I like that a lot because we develop a kind of rapport, and you do get a sense that things are working between you, that I'm helping the student in the way that they need. When they come back, I think, oh, good, that worked for them. And it's usually a sign that things are going well at the center when they do come back. So in the short time that I've been here, I have had a lot of repeated visits from students on either the same project or on new projects. And it's a pleasure to get to know them. Yeah.
Wonderful. Maybe I'll throw to you, Diane. I have a research project and I come to you, and for one project, do I see you multiple times, or how does that sort of kind of go as a flow?
Well, there is no limit, so it just depends on appointments being booked, but typically we tend to see students once per assignment. I love it when we see students again on a repeat basis. I especially love it if I see students in different years of their program. That's just kind of fun for us, because you see how you've evolved, your interests, and evolved as a researcher and all that. But I think we leave students, I'm going to assume it's because we do a good job, and we leave students with enough strategies that they found all their research sources, and they probably won't even use all of the ones they find. But the writing process, for example, I think maybe more iterative, so there's an opportunity to visit again, but I'm not sure. But typically it ends up being once, but there is no limit.
Out of curiosity, and this is just for you, Diane, but other people can answer it or think about it themselves. Do you see mostly students in their early years? Do you see people mostly in their later years, or is it all over the place?
I found the majority tend to be in their early years, because we are showing techniques that are applicable to different topics. What will happen is there might be little niche collections that aren't super obvious for other topics. And then we'll meet students, like I'll do a workshop that's actually led by a fourth-year student for first-year students, and that student at the end will say, oh, I wish I knew you guys did this in first year. And I'm like, well, didn't we see you in first year? So, but I do think if we were to look at our stats, the majority of the students we meet with are first to third year, and mostly first and second year.
That's great. All right, the same question to you, Ben. Talk a little bit about the average spread of multiple meetings with you.
Yeah, I just wrote my end of year report. So I know very clearly what those patterns are because you get a sense of them, but then you can actually see the data. So what I find out is the number of appointments that students make actually varies depending on the year of study. For the majority of first year students, we often see them anywhere from 1 to 3 appointments across the term, right? So often one appointment will lead to skills on another one. So they come to talk about time management. They're back in 2 or 3 weeks because they have a midterm coming up and they want to talk about study techniques. And then maybe there's a conversation a little bit later in the term, week 11 or 12, when things are getting a little bit tense around motivation, right? Often with the first year audience, because we know all of the research we have about universities tells us that that first year transition is one of the more difficult ones. By the time students are starting their second year, they have a really good sense for what the expectations are, for what the rhythm is for their learning. And yes, the content gets a little bit more challenging, but you understand the system in which you're learning in. And so what I often find when I am meeting with second, third, or fourth year students, it typically is a follow-up from a conversation we've had earlier in the term, but it's often a conversation in a new context, right? That I wrote a lot of tests and exams in my first and second year, but now that I'm in third year, I'm finding that there's more of an emphasis on assignments. And so we may talk a little bit about how that changes both your study approach and your time management, and then a great time to kind of connect you into the reference librarians as well as the writing instructors to really kind of develop those writing and researching skills for rounding. So I'm going to just suggest that it varies a little bit by where students are, where they are in that story of their own skill development, and what is the kind of assistance that they need in that particular year that they're studying in.
Great. Thank you so much. Now, I promised a second rapid fire one, and this, some of you have already answered a little, so this might give you a nice and simple sort of reassurance thing. It's my first meeting with any one of you. What's my homework? What do you expect students to prepare before they see you for the first time? What makes the appointments go really well? Anyone can jump in to start. Otherwise, I will pick.
I'll jump in because we have kind of a formula. We ask students to, not in a bad way, like we're totally flexible on the situation, but we always ask students to provide the assignment description if they can, even if that's copying and pasting part of it, because especially this is absolutely not to underestimate any first year student skills, but that transition that I think Ben was alluding to, there are some terms that profs will use and they're not always consistent about the kind of research they want you to use for the assignment. And we want to see that to make sure that we are pointing you in the right direction and not just going with your interpretation, which is totally valid, but we might pick up on some little clues or even know that instructor or that course. So we ask for the syllabus, and we ask for an idea of what the subject, the topic is. Now, we also do drop-in reference. And it's a bit of a side note, but with that, obviously, we can't ask people to prepare. But I will say the research consultations, you always get a lot more, I think you get a lot more out of them because we're able to know in advance, because our collections are giant. So when it comes to research at U of T, we're the largest academic library in North America in terms of size of collection. So if we have time to think about the key collections and places we want to recommend, it's inevitably going to be better than when you drop into the library, which we're happy to help and it'll get you started, but you're going to walk away and we're going to go, oh, should have told them about such and such. So that's all I wanted to add.
And thank you for reminding me. People may not fully appreciate this, but when they come to see you or any of your colleagues, Diane, they're getting a window on not only the collections you look at specifically, but they're part of the interconnected library system at U of T, which is what produces this astounding sort of level of depth and numbers in terms of what's available to students, both in paper and actually online for research. So it's one of the benefits also to having an embedded or local community member who's a librarian, is that you're going to get to that sort of way in across the board. The way you talked about,
can I just say that there are 44 libraries and you do have access to all of them, not just Vic libraries. And yeah, in case anyone didn't know, that's it.
Yes. I don't know if there's a special sort of in-game achievement when you visit all 44 libraries. I would hope there's some sort of little medal you get, but there you go. What you talked about, Diane, about prep, I feel it's maybe helpful to actually, because I think there's some thematic connections to jump to Alexia about sort of how students prep for writing center appointments. So I'll throw there next.
Yes, yeah, I was thinking that's a lot of Diane's comments sounded similar to some of the things that I might say in response to this question. While students are welcome to come to the center without a draft, for example, it is very helpful to have some kind of material, such as the assignment instructions or some questions, or the student will have done a little bit of reflecting before the session on areas that they find challenging generally about writing or specifically about an assignment. So just coming with something, a request, something that they would like to, an idea of what they would like to work on. And often that is just kind of like the foundation for the session. And we can go so many places from there. And that's what is so much fun. And it's great that we have the full hour really to do that. You can get a lot done in an hour. That's one thing that I've learned this term, is how much we can do in a 1 hour session together.
It's amazing. It didn't even occur to me to mention that all of you have slightly different standard times for your appointments and such. So maybe we'll come back to that, because it is shaped a lot around the missions that you all have. Having something you want to work on makes me think of Ben's work, so I'm gonna throw to him next. So you did talk a little bit about how that intake happens in your first appointment. Do you have anything else to add about how students sort of prepare their best way into getting the most out of meeting you, Ben?
Yeah, because we talk with students about so many different topics, you don't necessarily need to prepare something in advance, but I think there are 3 things that are really helpful in a learning strategy appointment. The first one is definitely to bring your curiosity with you. I think that is such an important learning tool, and one that helps us to start to see alternatives to the tried and true ways we've continually done something. We also need to bring our critical thinking. I think particularly with learning strategies, often our job is to poke as many holes in them as possible to see what will float in your context. So a little bit of critical thinking, definitely worth bringing with you into an appointment. And then the third and final element is just to be okay with a little bit of reflective thinking. We have to dig a little bit in the past to understand you a bit better in order to figure out a scaffold or a useful path for you into the future. So I would say curiosity, critical thinking, and reflection are probably the 3 things that you need for a learning strategy appointment. Everything else we tend to figure out when we're there.
Amazing. Let me throw last to Alexa to talk a little bit about, you've already talked about how you get the intake to start, to have an accessibility advisor, to be registered and such. So I'm coming to you for a specific meeting, perhaps with a particular challenge in mind. What do you like to see students come in with to get the most out of their meeting with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when meeting with your accessibility advisor, I think it would be important to bring your syllabus or have it ready on your computer screen, because a lot of support that we can provide when you're experiencing a flare-up is some extension support. Maybe we're talking to your professor about some of the unique accommodations you have access to in class. So it's just important for us to have your professor's contact information, what assignments you have in the course, because when we're thinking about accommodation, we have to make sure that we are not removing a core learning objective, which I think I said earlier too. So that's where we have to be really careful with accommodation as well. So bringing your syllabus, always helpful. And I think sometimes they can be reluctant to share more about how they're doing or how they're feeling. Anything that you feel like sharing is important. Even if you just say, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I don't know what to do, because accessibility advisors can provide support with next steps. However you're feeling is okay to share. Like, you don't have to feel like you have a whole narrative prepared. Like, just come as you are, and we can help to provide with next steps. So don't feel too much pressure to have everything organized before you see your accessibility advisor. I always tell students that I'd rather know if things aren't going well throughout the term than know later and have to provide retroactive extension or accommodation support.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
And actually, you raised an important point. I should emphasize when I said do homework ahead of time, it was mostly to get most of it. The last thing I want anyone to say is, oh my gosh, I want to use these learning supports, but it stresses me out of all the work I have to do before I see any of these people. That's not how it works. You know, it's about, like anything, when you start a conversation, if you kind of know what you want to get out of it, and so that starting point and the concrete information you're working with can make it go really well. I'm actually going to do slightly, as the original plan with the panelists was, I'm going to ask a bunch of general questions, then really open up the floor. But my last questions, that are kind of summary questions to the panelists anyway. And there's some great questions coming up in the chat. So what I want to do is shift a little there. And so there's one, and I don't know if my panelists can see the chat, but if not, but I'm going to write some of them out. And this one might go straight to Alexa, because I'm not sure I know the information that's being talked about, which is, does Vic, or in this, we can extend this to U of T, have online resource databases, or maybe this is actually for I actually, this maybe for, I don't know, none of you may know this, resource databases like JSTOR. I'm not sure what that's an acronym for. Oh, there we go. I see Ben's hand went up first. So Ben, why don't you jump in on that if you know it?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a Diane question because it's in the library, but like absolutely U of T has JSTOR. I came to U of T originally to do a PhD, and it is one of the largest research libraries in North America. And like just prior to this session, I was doing some research for another project, and it's almost impossible to not find something in our catalog. So yes, JSTOR is there, and like dozens and dozens and dozens of other databases that Diane can help you figure out which might connect to the disciplines you're studying. But like, yeah, it's endless, the trove here.
I'm definitely not one of the cool kids when I misread that with two questions and I picked the wrong panelist, but I also didn't pronounce it JSTOR, which is clearly how the cool kids pronounce it. So I'll just have to just sort of retreat into a corner in shame. But Diane, why don't you pick up any extra JSTOR stuff you want to talk about?
I don't really have anything to add, and it's good to hear from someone who doesn't, sounds slightly less impartial than I.
That's right.
There are thousands of databases. We are the largest academic library in Canada and somewhere like fourth in North America, near Yale and Harvard, and I never know who the third above us is. So that you'll have a lot. It's really about fine tuning. I find in the research consultations, the conversation ends up being finding out, like I will ask students, and I like this part, why they chose that course or that program. And sometimes that gives me clues as to like pointing them in the direction of certain kinds of articles or a certain disciplinary angle or lens on the topic, because you're never going to have a shortage of resources. It's really about focusing, what kind of subtopic are you going to end up honing in on?
Amazing. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to jump to a next question. I may take a part in answering this a little, but I do want to open it up to as well to get the panelists' own perspective on it. It was a great question. Thank you for asking it. What if we don't need an accessibility accommodation, but just want to talk because of stress or anxiety? So I have a few things to bring in, and I think to lead the thing, but to throw to the panelists, I would say that one of the great things about that question is it's hugely relatable. First of all, so really, I'm glad you asked the question for anyone else who was thinking of the same question, and we take that. We didn't take it for granted before. We certainly don't in this our late pandemic, where I think everyone was understanding what it meant to have to cope with this in a way that maybe they never had to before. But I will also say that there may be context. So I'll talk a little bit about broadly how you reach out to various mental health supports at the university, but I'll come back to that. But anxiety can also be provoked by situations and such. And there's even aspects of Ben's work that touches a little about stress in very particular sort of moments in learning. But I will maybe by that means I'll throw to Ben first, but ask any of the panelists to talk a little bit about what that question means to them, whether it's germane to their job or what they've seen and such like this. And I'll come back to any supports that we haven't talked about. But Ben, what do you want? If you want, the students come and talk to you about stress and anxiety in your work.
Yes, and just as we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about first year. It may be useful just to change this question a little bit. Instead of the word if, let's just put in the word and. Like we know that a stressful moment is going to come for you in the future, and that one of the key tools that you will use to move beyond that challenge is to reach out and talk with other people. So rather than if this happens, let's be like, when this happens, this is is the approach that you should use. And I would say, like, yes, definitely the formal supports by accessibility services. It's part of the human rights of Canada that students are accommodated and have that. There are a lot of students that fall into that envelope, but there are a lot of students who experience stress that might not necessarily be associated to a disability. It's the stress of being a student. And I would say that actually talking to any of us would probably be really helpful in that context. As a learning strategist, we do talk about specific strategies for managing stress and establishing balance in our life and setting those healthy habits that we were kind of talking about in that first activity. And of course, I hear from students the support that my colleagues are offering. So talking to an academic advisor can be incredibly valuable. They can let you know what your options are, and all of a sudden you don't quite feel like you're stuck in a corner. Or talking with a writing instructor can help you move past the stress or anxiety of a particular assignment, give you some insights or ways to move forward. Or connecting with the library can really help you to see that there are things that you're interested in writing about. This massive assignment that you had no idea how to approach, all of a sudden you have one or two really good leads that can help you to move forward. So I really like this question, and I think Tom's going to talk a little bit about health and wellness, which I think is the major resource that we have open to all students, but really just want to encourage you to think about this question really broadly, to plan ahead for this moment, and to think quite broadly about the number of different people you can connect with. And with that, I'll mute myself and allow my colleagues to chip in as well.
Anyone else want to talk a little bit about conversations that connect with stress and anxiety in their work?
Share more too about that. I'm just pulling open my email here because in my signature I provide some links to some resources too that students can utilize if especially when outside of business hours. So while there's health and wellness supports, and I think Ben maybe mentioned that Tom would talk about this too, but there's something called My SSP, which I refer students to a lot. They provide 24/7 mental health support for students as they need. Let me just paste this in the chat. U of T also has Navi. It's a new resource where you can kind of navigate some mental health related resources, but they've also expanded. So it's university resources and supports more generally as well. And so I usually share that. And then crisis lines as well. I know the term crisis can seem scary sometimes, but I think I've referred students to using crisis lines, and we have an academic progress and crisis team on campus that provide a lot of support to students who don't really know where to turn to. They're a very supportive group of people. So I think there are a lot of resources out there. It can just be hard narrowing down which one to use or where to find them. So I'm just gonna put this in the chat and send it out to everybody.
Just now, I did pop in My SSP and Good to Talk, but there's the only two I had on hand. So while you're saying and such, oh, and I see some more stuff. Great, thank you. Oh, the student life set, that's excellent. Yes.
Yeah, we just pushed in health and wellness. So just very quickly, like health and wellness is basically like a medical clinic on campus. So if you like stub your toe and it's bleeding prolifically, you can go there, but it's also a full mental health resource as well. So it's kind of all built into one setting at the Kaufman building.
Thank you. And yes, I like seeing Alexa, the added stuff there. Just in broad terms as well, I think actually we've covered the main things. When I talk to students about mental health, because it comes up in our conversations as advisors too. In fact, we now, we basically start every advising appointment with a check-in and say, how's your mental health? And that's not meant to ask for a clinical diagnosis. It's just a way to sort of say, how are you doing? And certainly it's been, mandatory in the last 2.5 years, but I think it will always be mandatory going forward. Where are you at? How are you managing things? The hotlines and stuff that are suggested are great ways to just kind of talk to someone confidentially that you don't know. It's just a way to sort of kind of talk through a sort of a burst and a squeeze, maybe of feelings that are difficult to contain. Protracted issues are things which feel more serious. One of the next level up, if I want to even talk about levels, yes, health and wellness is a key sort of medical element there that's there for all students. They also have same-day counseling. There's an intake process where you can reach out, and within 24 hours, they'll call your cell and they'll do a kind of a 15-minute conversation to kind of get where you're at and make recommendations about what you get next. That's actually also true of My SSP, by the way. My SSP can also do referrals as well. well. Obviously in a more serious way, we hope people will reach out to sort of get help from doctors and such like this. But on top of everything else, if you really do feel like this is a crisis and things like this, apart from doing all the things you would do to take care of any health crisis, like emergency rooms or things like this, you can also, again, reach out to anyone at the university who can help. There are staff at the university that we all work with who can help us, coordinate with a student who's just dealing with something that's really quite terrible in that moment, and how to get them a sense of sort of next steps and options that make them feel less alone and less really squeezed by a thing where they're not sure what to do next and they're feeling it pretty heavy in that way. As a side note, I'll also say this is actually an interesting little app, and you'll say if you go through U of T websites, you'll find it from time to time. It's called Navi, N-A-V-I, and I believe there's actually, I feel like there's some, anyway, I'm trying to remember that it's, I guess it's short for navigate, but what it is actually a sort of an AI-driven chat bot where basically you can type in things and it's constantly learning, but it will actually help you sort of, it'll ask you questions back and start to refine, to sort of give you suggestions of resources to help you with any kind of problem you have. And that's, of course, by definition, 24 hours a day. So reach in and check that out. Last but not least, I do want to echo what Ben said. Stress is going to happen. And I think we're getting better at not drawing too hard lines between, is it a condition or is it just, life, and just say all of it needs attention and self-care. So I hope you will also absorb the notion that don't be shy on any of these fronts in terms of things to reach out and such. For Diane and Alexia, who hasn't had a chance to answer on this, how have you found dealing with stressed out students themselves and such? Is it something that comes up in your conversations, or do you feel it in the vibe? How is it sort of playing out in your work?
Well, I do sometimes have students who come to a session because they're behind in their work. So they come under stress with a paper that they have to write. And writing is, I think most writers, even the most confident writers, will say that writing is stressful on any level, right? Articulating your ideas. And we all want to excel, and we all want to feel connected to our work. So students do arrive under sometimes very stressed out, and we talk about it. And I find that, again, to reiterate, we have this hour, and if we kind of set some goals and we sort of make a plan so that a student can leave the session knowing what to do and feel confident that the task has been broken down into manageable chunks, and also that I've been able to sort of alert them to any other wellness supports, right? Because we're all interconnected. I can be kind of a pathway to more support beyond the Writing Center as well, which I think is really important, that we're all kind of an integrated support team.
It's a very good point. It makes me reflect a lot that there's so many tasks that you have as a student, and writing is a fairly ubiquitous one. I've often thought of one of the things that I sometimes reflected on, even as I look back in my own time as a student, that writing, you get so much from talking to other people, as you said, from that interlocution, but it's actually a solitary pastime. Most writing we do on our own. It's us and the blinking cursor of Microsoft Word, and that can bring up a lot of intense feelings and such, and the potential to be overwhelmed and such is quite possible. So I'm not surprised you get that opportunity to be that pathway. I'd also think what you do in a writing sort of tactical approach how to deal with writing is kind of probably good wisdom in a lot of things that overwhelm us, which is break it down into chunks and start to work on it and such like that. Diane, let me bring you in on this. Have you been a pathway to mental wellness in your own work too?
A little bit. It's very similar to what Alexia mentioned, in that we will refer people to Navi, to on-campus services, but we're also like a friendly and safe space. And I work really hard to try to foster that. Like it's normal. We've seen it, and I understand that it can feel overwhelming. So we will be your sympathetic friend in that moment, but I am not trained particularly in very more in-depth mental health support. I try to keep myself informed so that I can recognize maybe when it's appropriate to recommend, etc. But yeah, we're more a pathway and a referral. And of course, in the moment, a safe space, and, you know, it's going to be okay. And I don't have anything to add, sorry.
No, but that's great because it's a healthy reminder for any problem you have, and that includes if you're finding your mental health is taking a bit of a heavy hit. There's no one wrong to talk to. We either are the person you should talk to, we know exactly who you should talk to, or we know exactly who to ask who you should talk to. And either way, you're one step away from the person at most that might be able to next take you to the next step. And that means, and we all share that responsibility very seriously in our work, regardless of our job and where we are set up and things. Now I'm going to ask another practical question, and it's just like this, which may have to do with stress in the sense of waiting. And I may be able to answer to some of this, but really the question is, okay, this sounds great. How far in advance should I make my appointments to see any of you, and such like this? So some of you may have to answer a bit more to get a sense of the kind of the lead time that may be necessary. I can perhaps talk a little bit about, the Writing Center to some extent, but you can hear from that. But I will say as a starting point that one of the things you should be probably aware of is when we tell people and tell new students that it's good to not be shy and reach out for help early. It's not just because it'll help you get your options sooner, but because the more common human thing is you do it in reaction to a challenge. And if you imagine the year with semesters, you can guess exactly when the challenges happen. They start, in September, not really, but you get into mid-October, the first tests start coming, the first small assignments come up and such, and things start to rise and things. And then it might coast a little bit and then spike again towards the end of the term. That's not a 100% surety, but for a lot of things that you might be connecting with because of work in your courses, you can expect that kind of bottleneck. And so trying to beat those frequent times is probably not a bad idea. And in that respect, I would sort of intro, and I'll let others fill in. But when I think of the Writing Center, for example, I think that if you plan out your term and you see when your writing assignments are early on, it's not a bad time to start to nab some appointments a little bit earlier, because as has been already pointed out, you can have a Writing Center appointment even when you haven't put a word to paper yet, if you're just trying to collect your thoughts and such like this. So getting in advance is sometimes helpful. When it's at its busiest, it could be, at least when I think of the Writing Center, possibly a couple of weeks if it's really filled up fast and such like this. So it's one of those things where we don't have a perfect model. We've either got lots of room or it's really tight. And that's just kind of the way a lot of these things work. But let me throw it to the panelists and talk a little about lead times for you in terms of reaching out and getting an appointment in a timely way. Maybe I'll throw to, I don't know, let's go to Alexa next and such. So, how quickly did the students see you? Do you have a rush period?
So, well, I think this is important to note for new registrants. So if you hope to have accommodation in place before you start courses, the first few weeks in September, it would be important to get that certificate of disability or your medical documentation submitted to our office by July 18th. We'll still process registrations after that date and you'll still receive accommodation, but we do hit a peak period in August where we're doing a lot of intakes, making sure that new students are receiving their accommodation. That lasts well into September as well. We also experience peak periods, midterm time, final time, petition season. So we suggest that if you want to make an appointment to meet with your accessibility advisor, to do so through our front desk team. You can find their contact information on our website. And they are also people I would connect you with if you have questions about the documentation or how to register. I can put their information in the chat as well. It's a general email, accessibility.services@utoronto.ca. So that's how students can make an appointment with their accessibility advisor or ask questions about how to register. But in peak periods, while you make an appointment with the front desk, I still encourage students to email me directly and just say, I reached out to the front desk to make a meeting with you. I want to talk about these concerns. If there's anything time sensitive, you can also email your accessibility advisor before the meeting and say, could you support me with this and this and this? Because while we do receive a high volume of emails, we do triage them and try to get the most urgent concerns out of the way first. So yeah, it can be a bit of a confusing process, especially as you're meeting your accessibility advisor, but it can take some time to get a meeting sometimes, depending on the time of year. So email still works well for us too, for those time sensitive requests.
Thank you, and that's a good point. Yeah, so you do a lot of work by email. Not all of us do, but that's a really helpful notion there. Let me throw to maybe Ben next. Talk about your busy periods, those busy periods, and lead time to appointments, possibly.
Yeah, so being a learning strategist is pretty nice. Every college has its own learning strategist, so I have space and time available for you in this room, friends. I would say that if you want to book an appointment in the summer term, there is a lot of capacity. So if you want to chat prior to the start of term, we can definitely do that. As I'm talking, I'm just going to drop in my email, which is one way to get a hold or book an appointment. In addition to that, we have an online booking interface. It's kind of hidden in the Vic Quirkus advising page. I'm going to drop that in there as well. So it just kind of allows you to find both in-person and virtual appointments that are available. Things do get a little bit busier in the academic year. So certainly I would notice that like around Thanksgiving, which for a lot of students is when that first assignment is due, it tends to get a little bit busier around then. It tends to get a little bit busier around the exam period, but like marginally busy. The average time for a student at Vic between booking and attending an appointment was 6.6 days last year. So there were a lot of students who got same day appointments. There are a lot of students who got appointments within 2 days. And there are some students who like intentionally booked appointments a few months apart so they could kind of scaffold their skill development. So general, I guess as a learning strategist, there is a lot of capacity for appointments. It tends to get a little bit tighter at those key deadline moments within the term, so your first assignments and the exam period. But in general, there is a lot of capacity to have conversations.
Amazing. Alexia, tell me a little bit about what students are telling you about how quickly they can get back to seeing you after seeing you, or things like that.
Well, in those heavier periods that you described, there can be long waiting lists. But one thing that I do tell students is that things can change very quickly within a matter of hours. So if you're on a waiting list, keep checking, because an hour before that student's session, they may, for some reason, something may have come up, or they no longer need the appointment, and it opens up pretty quickly. So I do see a lot of shifting around. So there's still hope. That's what I'm kind of saying if you're on that waiting list. But yes, booking ahead, like the students who really get the most benefit have planned, as you said, those appointments based on their schedule and their assignment due dates. It's an excellent way to do things. Perfect. Thank you. Diane, do you have times when you are such in high demand that they should plan ahead differently?
Always good to plan ahead, because research takes time. It's the going through all of the promising sources that we will point you towards that takes more time than you would expect. So we always suggest you start early, and we generally say we like a couple business days notice. So asking for an appointment on the same day, we will try, but it may not be likely. I know we're going to be a little shorter staffed in terms of librarians this coming year. So it's a good thing someone's on research leave, but we have a student graduate research assistant who will be doing some drop-in research help. But still, if you contact us in advance, we always try to accommodate an appointment, but I would aim for 2 weeks before your assignment is due, as a rule of thumb. And then if it came down to it and it was a last minute thing, if I received it, I would do everything I could over email to give you at least a starting point.
Excellent. And actually, these answers really reminded me about modes of connection. So I think I'll just do a quick summary, and you can chime in, anyone who wants to add to it. So we have heard that in many cases, some last minute work or some things can be done by email. But let me just clarify that, for apparently writing instructors tend to do most of their work in the appointments themselves and such, and they give you takeaways and there's a follow-up and such. Very rare cases, we've had writing instructors agree to do what we call asynchronous appointments. This is in a situation where a student student's time situation is so difficult that they can make a special request to the Writing Center director to sort of set up a situation where basically they send something in and they get some feedback back to them and such. It's very limited because it's quite time consuming to write feedback in that kind of way, but it's a rare option that can happen. But primarily for the Writing Center, you are kind of in live with an instructor for that hour. But I will say that Writing Center appointments recently have been primarily online through a great system that lets you sort of connect and both view the paper and mark up a paper at the same time. We'll be looking at seeing how we can integrate sort of in-person appointments again come September, but as in all things, one has to try to find the rooms and set that sort of thing up. I will say that both for Alexa and Benjamin, coming out of the pandemic, so most of these things were online, but in-person appointments are starting to phase back in. The mandate in all this is to create flexibility, even though we can be in person going forward. What we're going to hopefully inherit from our lessons learned in the pandemic is that online access can be a tremendous benefit for students, whether you're a commuter and just can't make it to campus, or there's other convenience elements. So the long game is to try to come up with the best mix so it gives the best access for students. Diane, you obviously can help in some cases if you get an email thing. During the pandemic, do you have any sort of preferences or modalities? Is it sort of mixed up between in-person and online? Is it more typically online for the one-on-ones? How's that go?
Well, it has been online through the pandemic, of course, but we're happy to do either or.
Brilliant. All right.
So if, coming to the Egypt Pratt Library is convenient, we will. And I put a long block of text, sorry, in the chat, but it was the ways for the research support part, the different ways to get in touch.
No, and I just wanted to call attention that there's been great chats going on in the chat. That's why I guess they call it chat. But, sorry about that. But the great question on research and such and how to think about that. It is an interesting trajectory, finding these opportunities to do research at different programs, but also when you'll be asked it automatically. And sometimes it depends on the discipline too, whether you'll be just asked to do this straight up or whether you can find these opportunities and such, especially in your later years. Finding research opportunities, no matter what your discipline, can be really exciting. And I really want to thank Diane for giving some great links there. We even have a teaching staff member who's hired by Victoria University to help students think about research. His name is Sean Ross. If you Google Victoria College Research, you'll find that as well. I think that may have been among the links, but there are lots of different ways where students are trying to get that experience, both for their own edification and possibly as a building block for what they might do after they graduate. And so research is definitely a big deal. So we will be, Camille asked a great question. Will they be the majority in person? Well, I would probably say we're going to wait and see. We're probably going to make in-person appointments ample enough so that if people would prefer that, they're not running shy. But we may try to semi-organize it in a 50-50 and see where things go. One of the things that all of us have yet to find out is when things are quote unquote normal, whatever that means again, what actually will be the statistical sort of weight. Will students, generally speaking, prefer in person, or they generally find online more convenient, or will it be an interesting sort of mix depending on the service? So in some respects, we're trying to go in as much ways as we can plan and give the options, and it'll be very interesting to see what's there. But in an ideal world, you should have the maximum flexibility of both. So we can imagine a world where all of us are on site and prepared to meet people in person, but everyone has a link so that if they can't get to that office on time, they can come through an online sort of platform like Zoom or Teams, which is very common at U of T, or in terms of the Writing Center, there's something called WC Online, which is the sort of platform there. But getting to that point and getting ourselves back into our old reflexes of being in person and such like this, these are all things that we're doing in a phased way. But it's a great question, Camille. Now with these, we're at 4:13. Keep the questions coming in the chat. I'm going to do, I didn't prepare the panelists for this question, but it really came up in their answers. So sorry, it's not going to be, no worry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a phrase or maybe just a word, and I want you to talk about how it intersects with your work and such. And I'm coming back a bit to the word clouds because there's some words that came up that I think all connect with your work, but in sometimes interesting ways. So we'll start with an easy one. So make it short and sweet. What does that word mean in terms of the work you do and the service you give students? And I'll start with this phrase: time management. So, Ben, when someone comes to you, what is time management? How does the time management intersect with your work? It should be fairly straightforward, but go for it.
Yeah, so this is like one of the biggest conversations I have. The second biggest one would probably be study techniques. I love talking about time management. First off, because if you think about it, the time doesn't, or the term itself doesn't make any sense, right? Time is just a unit of measure, and we can't actually manage a unit of measure. So we use this term time management, but just alluding back to what Tom was saying at the very beginning, it's actually different skills that we're using with time management. And I would argue that our ability to effectively manage time, if we could actually do that, is in our skills on planning, our skills of doing, and our skills of monitoring the gap between the two. Because certainly, I manage my time, and there's always a gap between what I plan and what I do. And this ability to monitor it actually is the thing that helps us to be a little bit more resilient and to figure out what those small changes we need to do to reach those goals. So I would translate time management into planning, doing, and monitoring. And then from those three skills, we could probably get really close at a system that might work for you.
Perfect. Thank you. Next on the hot seat, Alexa. What does time management mean in your appointments, off the top of your head?
Thanks, Tom. So I think it comes up a lot in our appointments as well. A lot of students talk about when they experience flare-ups, or it's closely related to a lot of diagnoses. So students who have ADHD or even depression and anxiety talk about time management. And if they're experiencing a flare-up, they have trouble with organization, making a schedule, procrastination, perfectionism. So while we do talk about accommodation, we also talk about that skill building piece. So we refer to people like Ben. I make a lot of referrals to Ben. And we also have learning strategists at Accessibility Services too, because there are skills that you can work on to improve and cope during symptom flare-ups too, because while we can put accommodation in place, it doesn't take away what you're experiencing. We can't really erase it and make it go away, even though we wish we could. We can provide supports, put supports in place so you can build on your skills. So it comes up a lot for us too. And we do a lot of referrals because Ben's team and everybody who provides learning strategy support is really important.
Brilliant. Thank you. Alex, tell me a little bit about time management and your work.
Well, I guess in relation to writing, time management is tied with planning and the writing process. So what's helpful for students, and I think we talked about it briefly before, is breaking down a task. And often what I'll do with students is I will set up a schedule for them, working with their own schedules, right? So that we can take them through a writing process, say a paper, outlining, drafting, revising. And it can be really, really helpful just to set those dates, just these self-imposed deadlines. It's amazing how much that helps. I do it for myself still, because first of all, it makes everything manageable. And there's a path, and you can see there's a beginning, middle, and end to the process, which is, I think, when you can't see that pattern and that the project, you will bring it to completion, you can be overwhelmed. So time management really is about breaking things down into steps and having these little deadlines that you can adhere to.
That's amazing. Yes, definitely sort of wisdom I still try to not always successfully adhere to in my own work. Diane, again, you've talked a bit about good planning already, but any sort of particular punctuating thoughts on time management and the work that you do with students?
I don't have very much new to add, but yeah, I will always ask when the assignment is due, and that I will never censor what I'm sharing, but it may, tailor that I won't give you and if you want to go in this other direction, if there's not a lot of time, I will try to help to keep it focused and manageable, even the information I will refer students towards. But I've already said it, just reminding students that it's also, if these are academic articles, it's a different kind of reading for a lot of people than, reading your favorite novel. So do not underestimate how long it takes to read. I think somebody put early on, I noticed in the word cloud, what was it? It was stamina for reading stamina. And I thought, yes, it's true with, reading, and there's a citation every second line. It's a different kind of reading. It can be challenging for concentration. I am sympathetic to that, even though, you will be asked to find scholarly articles a lot of the time.
Yes, it is true. Actually, very good thing to underline. And reading was actually a few words got out. That was great. I think we often assume it's a natural thing, but I remember plenty of times reading philosophers translated from French into English so I could read it. And I would read, my stamina was about 10 minutes long, and then I had to go stare at flowers for a while to kind of get it all the processing going. So I see a few laughing faces, so they get a bit of the vibe there. Great. So this is a broad question. So to manage our course load, are there resources that clearly outline assignments, papers, due dates, exam schedules for each class? Or do we only find out first week of class? Great question. It is, in some respects, you normally find out first week of class, unless you've joined a course where they release the syllabus early. But that's the document that's particularly key. It outlines the learning objectives for a course, all sorts of key information like contact hours, how to reach out and get help, the expectations around rules and regulations and such like this. But it also breaks things down, what you learn each week, what your readings are expected each week, and also when things are due. And it can form the basis for setting up your own calendar, so you know in a particular term when the hot zones are, because across 5 courses, typically these courses are all independently designed. So you may have some tough times when a couple of things are due on sequential days or something. So getting ahead of that and planning for it is critical. Exam dates, what you look for something like in the academic calendar, any of the resources we use to tell people about dates, you know that if it's in the 12 weeks of class, there may be tests booked there, and that you find out from the syllabus. If there's some final exam, like this is an in-person exam or some sort of assessment, there's a few weeks at the end of each term that are designed to sort of plant some of the big sort of finale sort of exams there that might be worth like 20 or 30% of your mark and such. And that is a schedule that comes out in the term. So you have to keep that whole block free, but you'll find out what your exam schedule is. It's a thing that becomes a second sort of discovery, usually somewhere about, let's say 6 to 8 weeks into the term and such like that. So you can know. So, but your obligation is to keep that end of term free always, just in case, until you know what lands where. Some courses don't have finals, and so you'll know everything as soon as you get the syllabus. In our last 9 minutes, I'm going to I'll say, when creating our timetable, how should we determine how feasible a course load is, and what courses should we take outside of meeting prerequisites? What a great question. And we've talked about it in some of our sessions, and we have more sessions coming up, so do check the Quirkus about planning. But in the broadest sense, I will say, again, when I talk about quote unquote a standard or normal framework, I get rid of put those in quotes because all of you will find out your own sense of pace and load that matters and such. But if barring not having any sort of reference point, you want to aim for 5 credits in total for a fall winter session. That's the equivalent. If you think of a course as either being a full course that runs from September to April, or half courses that either run in one term or another, you're talking about basically 5 courses a term and such in that way as a kind of a typical schedule. And what you can expect from that is, depending on your discipline, there could be anywhere from 2 to 3 hours of lecture for each course. That's probably a given. You may get, for humanities and social sciences, an hour of tutorial, possibly in addition, which you also sign up for. So think of it as 3 to 4 hours of that contact with the course itself. In some cases, for sciences, you will have labs and tutorial and other tutorials that will add more busyness. So, but even for very busy sort of students in the life sciences, you may have a week where it may be 20-ish hours or so that you're sort of, at most, that you're kind of in contact with somebody. You're in a lab or in a tutorial or in a lecture and such, which for many students coming out of high school will seem quite light relative to the rigorous regimen that they had coming out of high school. So don't let that fool you in thinking you can add more courses, because for all the time you are in a class, it is expected that you're spending time outside of class, prepping the readings, getting familiar with things, and doing all the work outside of it. Good follow-up question here. What's the difference between practicals and tutorials? Think of a tutorial as a way to sort of break down a large class, particularly into smaller chunks, and a TA or a tutorial assistant will sort of go over the recent content of the lectures, maybe with exercises or conversation starters to help, and maybe even small sort of assessments to help sort of sink that stuff in. It gives you a chance to have more conversations with other students and a TA that's outside the big class. Nearly every type of course can have a tutorial, especially in first year and such, excepting possibly very small first year foundation classes, they may not. Practicals are labs. So this is where you have to do hands-on stuff. So you see those in the sciences, particularly chemistry, for example, biology, physics will have lab time. That's part of the skills learning. It's not just in the sciences, though. You can also find labs, as it were, in things like visual arts, where there's studio time as well, and so forth. So thank you for that question. It's good, and it will become very germane as you get close to it. I have a few summary questions for things, but I think I'm going to try to summarize things into one, sort of element. All my panelists I want to thank before I ask them this last question for all their great conversation and their great insight, and just helping really see how there's a great connections. We talked about how, even some of the panelists can essentially collaborate with each other, whether they know it or not, by virtue of referral and such. If you're writing a research paper, the Writing Center and the library will be possibly key elements of things. There's also ways to sort of develop your skills to sort of manage life and school at the same time that will bring an accessibility advisor or a learning strategist into play really well. And really, this is just a tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of things you can call learning support at the University of Toronto and at the Faculty of Arts and Science and at Vic. There's going to be another panel later on this summer where we'll add a few more people and talk even more about what it means to mentally sort of think about what it means to transition to university learning. So you'll get more information about that up on the Quirkus course later on. That's late in August as you're getting closer to the first day of classes. But my last question to everybody here is, what do you like most about your job? Alexa.
Go. Yeah, there's a lot I like about my job. I think I worked with people who have disabilities for a very long time. A lot of the barriers that people encountered were in school. And so what I really enjoy is being able to support students to reach their goals, removing those barriers that are in their way, that are not their fault by any means, but sometimes it can feel like that. And just having conversations where we're removing the pressure. I think coming to U of T, there's a lot of pressure. It has a very good reputation. I think students feel imposter syndrome a lot, and they don't feel like they really belong. But when we have meetings with students and we provide support, just seeing their growth and development and reassuring them that they're on the right path and they're doing well, that I really enjoy that about my job.
Understandable. Who wants to take a next shot at it? Diane.
I think we're synchronized, Ben, in our hand up, but I'll go this time. I love hearing what assignments and topics students are working on, especially when students get to pick their own topic from kind of a broad area. We tend to be intellectually curious people who work in education, and I always find it interesting, and people will take creative angles on things. And sometimes I end up being quite envious of the classes you're in, because I am older and education didn't feel as exciting as it seems to be, or maybe it's a Vic thing. The multidisciplinary lens that things are looked at, it's all really fascinating. It just keeps me motivated to keep learning myself. So I love hearing what students are thinking about and what they find interesting.
Thank you. That's very cool. It's true, though. Ben, Alex, who wants to go next? All right, Ben, you unmuted first.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost easier to say the things you dislike about your job than what you like about them, because there are a lot of fun things about the kind of work that we get to do. I certainly feel like I'm a lifelong learner. And I think many of you probably feel the same way. And one of the things I really like about my job is that although we're talking about now in the context of your university level learning, this is just one chapter in a much broader story. So what I'm often feeling when I'm in my appointments is I feel like there is a river of your learning that's flowing past me. In this one moment that we're sharing together, we're essentially skipping stones across the surface. And that may alter the course of that river ever slightly to ideally reach your objectives. But really, it's about the learning that you've been doing since you were quite little. It's about the learning that you've been doing outside of school, and some of the techniques you use in your hobbies or your skills or your activities really kind of can play a role in how you want to shape yourself as a university level learner. So I feel like I'm constantly immersed in the sense of change and in the sense of kind of a lifelong trajectory. So I think that's one of the things that just keeps me really excited about the conversations on a day-to-day basis.
Amazing and beautifully imaged. Alexia, take us home on this one.
Okay. I think I just feel really fortunate every day because before every appointment, I get excited about what new paper or what new idea a student is going to bring to the session. So I am actually genuinely really, because I mean, Diane mentioned that too, the sort of interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary experience kind of fits with the Writing Center, where I get to meet students and work with students from a very wide range of disciplines, not only in disciplines that are my specialization. And it's really heartening to me, because if I can connect with and support a student, say, in fourth year neuroscience, for example, writing a report, there's something that it kind of affirms what I believe, which is that it's possible to connect with others through intellectual work, intellectual pleasure. Like you can find a common ground across all the disciplines. And it just makes the job really fun, simply put.
It's lovely. And the world could use a lot of more connecting and such like that. So that's a really lovely thing to say. I've also got to thank my colleague, Sarah, who's an academic advisor in my office too. So I'm gonna put her on the spot. Sarah, what do you like quickly about your job?
I love the students. I love getting to email every one of you and checking in all of our events and seeing you so many on Saturday. And a lot of you are private messaging me too. So lots of fun seeing those messages, but you're my favorite part.
Oh, well, on that note, thank you all for coming. Let me thank again all the panelists who gave of their time and to talk about their work. There will be more opportunities to connect with them with some sessions towards the end of the summer, but also to connect with them as students when you are here. So please don't be shy and reach out. They're all part of a suite of services that are both Vic sort of localized, but also, representing a great sort of dedication of the university widely to try to support the learning of students, because we know you're just smart and we know that you've got what it takes, but part of the task is always just to kind of, and part of the wisdom and brightness of people is to make sure you connect with people that can make it go even more smoothly and even better. Thank you all. We have more Open Vic online sessions coming up. Check the Quercus pages for that, and other sessions about the more sort of mundane stuff, but important stuff about enrolling in courses and course planning and such like this. And keep connecting with your e-mentors. And at that, I will bid you all adieu and have a great rest of your Tuesday afternoon, the first day of summer.
Thanks to you too, Tom, and we look forward to meeting all of you students.